Chapter 4. Alone. 1 week later, as Mike looked on, and as Charlie scooped chicken feed into an old biscuit tin, Mrs. Peyton emerged from the back door of the house and made her way to Mike. "How are you doing, Mike? Still not sleeping too well?" she said concernedly. Mike nodded. Mrs. Peyton laid her hand gently on Mike's shoulder. "I know it's hard, Mike, but I don't think your mum would like to see you feeling so down. Do you?" Mike shook his head. "Could you do something for me?" Mike looked up. "Would you get some bedding for Bud? Charlie has already mucked out the stall," said Mrs. Peyton. Mike nodded. "I think it will do you good," continued Mrs. Peyton. Slowly, Mike made his way to the stable, slid back the retaining bar on the weathered doors, and flung them open, bathing the barn's gloomy interior in sunlight and a well-used mule cart with its shaft tips resting on the brown dirt. Bud, the family mule, craned his neck over his stall and looked at Mike with doleful eyes. "Want some fresh bedding, Bud?" said Mike, walking over. He patted the mule's neck, and Bud raised his head in a nodding gesture. "Okay, boy, I'll get you some." And turning about, he stepped over the shafts of the mule cart to a pile of straw and scooped up an armful. Opening the stall door, he pushed against the mule. "Back, Bud," he said, and Bud retreated. "Here you go," he said, spreading the straw on the floor. When he finished, he stepped out of the stall and closed the door. Bud craned his neck over the door again, and Mike stroked his muzzle. "It might not be fancy, but at least you have your own bed," he said, as thoughts of the memorial service, police inquiries, and being placed out to other parts of the country on adoption trains crowded his mind. "I'm just too old. No one adopts 11-year-olds. Moments later, he heard Charlie calling the chickens in the yard outside. Mike walked out to see Charlie laying a seed trail up the chicken coop ramp to lure the chickens home. "That's a neat trick," said Mike. "Best to keep them in one place, or I'll be hunting for eggs all over the place in the morning," replied Charlie, laughingly, as the chickens jostled about, pecking the seed and following the trail Charlie laid. "You look like a Pied Piper," said Mike. When the last one strutted in, hurried along by Charlie, he raised the ramp, an old advertising sign, Mrs. Wilson's patented heroin cough medicine, and pegged it closed against the hatch opening. "Ma and Pa were down at the police station again," said Charlie. "Yeah?" "The sergeant said he's got to contact this Society of Orphans, sooner or later," said Charlie. Mike stiffened. "Pa asked if you could stay here, but the sergeant said it would raise too many questions." "How come?" said Mike. Charlie paused and looked at him. "Because I'm supposed to be at boarding school with all the other Tuscarora kids. But the government don't know about me." "Oh, I never knew," said Mike. "I have to lie low, but you'd be put on the adoption trains for sure, unless someone here took you in. Ain't you got any kinfolk? Didn't your ma ever say?" Memories of his old home flashed before Mike, and his mouth felt dry. He shook his head. "Nope," he croaked. Charlie looked at him. For a moment he did not say a word and shrugged. "Ma will have dinner ready." As they walked towards the house, Mike nudged Charlie's arm. "What if I got a job?" They stopped and looked at each other. "Where?" said Charlie. "Maybe I could help your pa on his cold rounds." "Maybe," said Charlie. "I'll ask him after he goes to get his cough medicine." "I could go and get it for him," said Mike. "I'd like to." "He doesn't want anyone to know he takes it," said Charlie conspiratorially. "But Ma knows. Sometimes she wants me to follow him, just to make sure he's okay." Charlie opened the back door of the house, and Mike's stomach rumbled as the aroma of Mrs. Peyton's cooking wafted out. "I sure am hungry," said Mike. "You'll get used to it," said Charlie, shrugging, leading Mike inside. "Dinner won't be long, boys," said Mrs. Peyton. "George went to get some things. He'll be back soon." "Want me to follow him, Ma?" said Charlie, and he looked knowingly at Mike. "It's okay, Charlie. I think he'll be fine," said Mrs. Peyton. Half an hour later, they heard Charlie's paw fumbling with the lock on the front door. Then it swung wide, and he leaned against the doorpost, his large frame filling the opening. He looked gaunt. Mrs. Peyton rushed to his side and put a gentle arm around him. "You okay?" she asked, ushering him to the table. "You'll feel better after you get some food into you," she said. Mr. Peyton slumped onto a chair, and Mrs. Peyton hurried to the stove, picked up 2 dinner plates, arranged like a clamshell, and returned. Carefully she lifted off the top plate, sending a cloud of steam billowing to the ceiling. Leaning into the wispy column, Charlie's paw sniffed the air. "Smells great, Josie," he said, putting an arm around her waist. Mrs. Peyton blushed and looked at Charlie and Mike. "The boys are watching," she said, patting her hair. And, easing an arm from around her waist, she planted a kiss on Mr. Peyton's forehead. Grinning, Mr. Peyton winked at Mike and Charlie and lifted a forkful of food to his mouth. "I saw that wink, George Peyton," said Mrs. Peyton, pointing an accusatory finger playfully at him. Mike and Charlie smiled at each other before eagerly tucking into their food. When they were finished eating, Mike tapped Charlie under the table and gestured towards Mr. Peyton. Charlie looked questioningly at Mike. "Oh," he mouthed, and turning to his father said, "Pa?" Slumped in his chair, Mr. Peyton jerked his head and looked around. "Huh?" he said, sitting upright and smacking his lips. "What's up?" "You know when you do your coal rounds and I come with you to help out?" Uttered Mr. Peyton. "So, I was kind of wondering." He gestured in Mike's direction. "Well, me and Mike were wondering if he could come work with us. You know, delivering coal." Mr. Peyton looked from Charlie to Mike, and Mike felt Charlie nudge him under the table with his foot. Mike looked at Charlie, who was staring back pointedly at him, gesturing with his eyes for Mike to say something. Mike perked up. "Yes, that's right, Mr. Peyton. I could look after Bud, or maybe help load coal," he said. "Yeah, Pa, and he could shovel coal into the basements, or you could get him a job at the coal depot. You said the manager is always looking for people to break up the big lumps of coal." Mike nodded. "Well, Pa?" said Charlie. Mr. Peyton looked at Mrs. Peyton, who was grimacing. "I'm not sure, Mike," she said. "Your mother often told me that she wanted you to finish school. It was very important to her. She even schooled Charlie when she found out we didn't want him to go away to boarding school." Mike looked quizzically at Charlie. "Just like I told you, me being Tuscarora and all," said Charlie. "Charlie!" his mother said. "It's okay, Ma. Mike knows I'm Tuscarora, right, Mike?" Mike nodded. "See, Ma?" Mr. Peyton covered his mouth, but Mike saw the smile in his eyes. Mrs. Peyton glared at Charlie's paw. "And what are you smiling about?" "Nothing," Charlie's paw said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I didn't say a word. But now that you asked," he said jokingly, "it will only be for a little while, and it will give Mike some time to sort things out." "I don't know," she said. "Come on, Josie. Just let him try it. He needs something to take his mind off." "You know what?" said Mr. Peyton. Then, after what Mike thought was a long time, she nodded. "Well, all right, so maybe for just a little while, and I mean a short while, George Peyton, just till school opens, mind." "Thank you, Mrs. Peyton. You too, Mr. Peyton. You won't regret it. I'll work hard, I promise," said Mike. Mrs. Peyton reached to straighten an errant hair on Mike's head. It reminded him of when his mom did the same. "I'm going to work hard, Mom. I'll make you proud of me," he thought. "I'll even finish school somehow."